Hello students, I'm Devalina Hazarika and in this module 1 of sampling methods, I'm going to discuss about the concept of sampling, sampling frame, sampling process and sampling methods. So let's start with understanding the concept of sampling. Since in most of the research studies, it is very difficult to characterize the whole population. So in order to best analyze the result, the sample is taken from the population which best described the characteristics of the population. So here a sample is a part of a total population. It can be an individual element or a group of elements selected from the population. And it represents the population and of course suitable for research in terms of cost, convenience and time. So, a good sample must be representativeness of the population. It should have a fair amount of accuracy and of course it should be adequate in size and must be reliable. So, sampling is the act or process or technique of selecting a representative part of a population for the purpose of determining the characteristics of the whole population. Now the sampling frame, it is about from where the sample is actually being collected. Here again, one need to understand that in sampling frame, it is the target population about which the study is done. And from this sampling frame, a part which is the accessible target population is taken as a frame, and then from that sampling frame exactly the actual sampling is done. So in order to understand the sampling frame, we need to specify the target population. Now let's try to understand the sampling process. Now this sampling process is the 7 steps which is involved. Starting with the first one, that is defining the population. So in order to understand what exactly the study or about which the study is being done, it is necessary to define the population. So it is the aggregate of all the elements defined prior to selection of the sample. So while defining the population, we need to understand few important things. So let's see what exactly they are. So it is about specifying the elements, then knowing the sampling units, the extent and the time. Suppose we were to conduct a survey on a consumer product which is being used in households. So here the element is the product and the sampling unit could be the retail outlets or the malls or the supermarket where the product we can exactly get. And the extent is the area. Say for example could be the Dehradun city. And the time frame is the extent about which the study needed to be done. So this is how at the first stage of sampling, we need to define the population. Now, the next stage is to identify the sampling frame. So, sampling frame is the source list from which the sample is to be drawn, and it contains the names of all the sampling units. So, mainly the sampling frames could be the census report, the electoral registers, or the list of members of trade at the industry association. It could be the list of members of some professional bodies, or could be the list maintained by the local bodies or the municipalities, and even the returns from a larger earlier survey or some maps also. These could be the source of sampling frame. Now next we need to identify or specify the sampling unit. Now the sampling unit is the basic unit containing the elements of the target population. So the sampling unit can be the geographical one, maybe the state or a district or a village, or some construction unit such as a house or a flat, or even a social unit, could be a family, could be a club or a school, or maybe the individual units also. After specifying the sampling unit, we need to specify the sampling method. Now, sampling methods is exactly how the sample units are selected. So, a researcher has to determine which of the two methods, that is probability or non-probability sample method, is to be used. Now here, in case of probability sample, where the chance of every unit in the population being selected in the sample is known. But in case of non-probability sample, the probability of inclusion of any unit in the population in the sample is not known. The selection of the units depends on the human judgment, or you can say the convenience of the researcher, and it is rather than a pure chance. So after specifying the sampling method, the next is to determine the sample size. So the sample size decision is related directly to the research cost, and it must be justified. So the sample size should neither be too large or too small. So the researcher, while deciding the appropriate size of the sample, must consider the factors such as the nature of universe. That is, if the nature of universe is homogeneous, so a small sample could be proper, but for a heterogeneous nature, they needed to have a larger sample. Similarly, the nature of the study, the type of sampling, or the standard of accuracy that is expected, and of course, one of the very important thing is the availability of finance. So depending on these factors, a researcher determines the sample size. So the next step is to specify the sampling plan. It means that the researcher should indicate how the decision made so far are to be implemented. Like for example here, like if a survey of a household is to be conducted, a sampling plan should define a household containing instructions to the interviewer as to how he should take a sample. Should he take a systematic sample of household? And also they need to advise him on what he should do when there is no one available on his visit, and so on. So that means there should be some guidelines which would help the researcher in every step of this sampling process. So that is what we mean by specifying the sampling plan. And after specifying the sampling plan, the final step is to select the sample. So it is the final step in the sampling process, and where the actual selection of the sample elements are carried out. And at this stage, it is necessary that the interviewer stick to the rules outlined for the smooth implementation of this business research. So this steps involves implementing the sample plan to select a sample required for the survey. So these 7 steps are the important steps of sampling process. So thank you for watching this.